before we get into the show, make sure to do a couple things. First of all, click the subscribe button down below and make sure to turn on your notifications, please, in order to get updated content that I start to put out. I do put out weekly videos, so hopefully you enjoy those. The second thing you can do is to make sure to be empathetic and understanding for all of my guests that come on this show, but otherwise, enjoy the show. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Dives in the Minds of Esports. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and my guest today is a content creator, or previous content creator, I guess, but now, more importantly, he's a coach for Overwatch. He is currently working with Uprising Academy. Before that, he was working with Toronto Esports, which got rebranded into Uprising Academy, and then before that, he was working with XL2. Please let me introduce a name that I am going to majorly screw up beforehand. Ridouan. Bouzrou, maybe better known as ioStux.
Surprisingly successful, actually, but yeah, we'll just stick with Stux. I think that's
Stux. Oh God, you see, this is one of those names that I saw beforehand, and I was like, I'm going to butcher this, and it's gonna be okay, and so it is life. So I'm really excited to have you on the show. There's lots of things that I'm looking forward to talking about, including more about you as a person, which there's some stuff out there on you as a person that I was able to find, not a whole ton, which I think is really cool and what I like to do about this show. And then I also kind of want to challenge or maybe talk about some of your different philosophies and how you feel about some of that stuff. So we're going to kind of jump right into it and go with something a little bit maybe easier. So one of the things that isn't really out there, I mean, one of your hobbies is definitely playing video games, and you've talked about like World of Warcraft as being your hobby. Okay, but maybe an easier question is, what do you like to do with the limited amount of free time that you have? Because you don't have much. Or what do you like to do for like hobbies or personal? Are you like out there going out on dates? Are you playing guitar? What are you doing with your free time?
Well, it depends. I've gone through a couple of stages. So when I started, I guess when I was younger, one of the main hobbies that I had was playing the piano, but I kind of stopped doing that eventually. And as soon as Overwatch kind of became my main profession, or like when I started getting into coaching, I was still in uni, and so I was kind of balancing university and the YouTube content and doing the private coaching. But as soon as I quit uni and I like fully committed to coaching, I guess my biggest fear is always to lose a match or lose a tournament and then having to ask myself the question, did I really give it my all? So I'm always very careful about how I spend my time outside of coaching. Right now, I guess the main thing that I do outside of coaching or scrims or preparing reviews and that sort of stuff is I actually play Guitar Hero. It's very fun. I used to play it when I was younger. And I don't want to brag, but I'm pretty freaking good at it.
Okay, well, like Fire and Flames expert level good?
Well, I think I have like 93% on that one. So like I'm pretty. I'm not like I started playing it actually when I was on XL2 still. I was like, I because on XL2 I struggle a little bit with like work and life balance, and a lot of people have told me, hey, maybe you should try to get something that isn't Overwatch related to kind of get your mind off of things. So I figured, because I had the old controller, like that I had when I was playing on my PlayStation 2, I had it on my shelf, and I looked around and I was like, can you still play that game? And that's when I kind of looked around, and Guitar Hero, or Clone Hero as it's called right now, it's kind of a client for fans. It actually started kind of rising in popularity. Like if you look at it on YouTube, there's some newer videos that have over 1 million views of people beating through the fire and flames at 175% blindfolded and that sort of stuff. So I figured, I might as well give it a try. And, it was really good. Because one of the issues is that I can't really put my mind onto things right now when I'm focused on Overwatch, because when I commit to something else, like another competitive esports title, like League of Legends maybe, or any other form of competition, it kind of clouds my mind. So I wanted something that I can invest time in, that I can get better at, and practice and kind of see progress in without it affecting my focus on Overwatch. And that's one of the great things about Guitar Hero that worked so well for me. It's that you don't need to think. There isn't any strategy or anything. Yeah. It's just mechanical practice. There's really not sure. There are like some certain ways to play certain patterns. Do you want to play this with one hand or with two? Like that sort of stuff. But other than that, you just play it and you get better. So it allowed me to kind of have something going on the side that I could get really, really good at without it affecting how well I do my coaching. And I don't really feel bad. Like, even if we lose a match, I'm not going to tell myself, oh, well, you shouldn't have played, Guitar Hero for an hour last Tuesday, because I think that it has a very positive effect on how I see things. Yeah. Because for one, it allows me to better relate with my players, because I'm progressing on something that they're progressing on. And it's just relaxing and kind of keeps my head clean. I guess another hobby, I don't think you can call it a hobby, but it is something that I've pursued for 2 months now. Is I'm kind of a fat boy, so I actually started doing some weight loss, and it's really good actually, because as a coach, it can be a little bit hard, kind of showing your players that they don't really realize how hard coaches work sometimes. Yeah. And I figured, the best way to kind of show them that, they can change is, if I can change.
Actually, there's a huge model of psychology. It's called modeling behaviors. That is really important for any sort of behavioral change when you're working with someone. That anything that you expect your players to do, or really anyone you're working with, you should be modeling that behavior. And if you can't model the behavior, the likelihood of them picking it up is significantly smaller. Yeah,
exactly. So. That's actually interesting, because I used to talk to Weldon Green a while back. He used to be the coach for TSM.
Yeah.
And okay, I see there's a history. But anyways, I used to meet him because he actually lives in Germany, and it was very interesting, because I haven't done any like psychology courses or anything of the sort. Everything that I know is just stuff that I've kind of taught myself, or that pretty much that I just figured out by myself. And I started talking to him, or like, now I'm talking to you, and there's like things that I do that I don't fully understand, but it turns out that they're like already kind of established concepts. So that's something that I'm doing. I managed to lose 20 pounds in 2 months, so nice. Everything is going pretty well so far. But I just like kind of having something on the side that I can progress. Like, I'm kind of a progress whore. If there's nothing that let's phrase it that way. When Cookie Clicker came out, my grades suffered tremendously.
Yeah, so I should clarify, I don't necessarily hate Weldon. There's some things that he's done for the scene related to my profession that I don't particularly like, and the way that he kind of sells himself, I don't particularly like. And he kind of portrayed this idea of sports psychologists when in the United States, in order to be a sports psychologist, you actually need to be licensed in the state you're in to do therapy. And so almost everyone who you see get called sports psychologists are not sports psychologists because of the licensing. So as someone who comes from mental health and owns like a counseling firm, like some of that stuff really irks me. So I should clarify.
I can get that.
Because I think mental health is a very long way to go in esports, and I think it is very, very young. Sure. Yeah. So when I see, like, there's some things I'm like, I really wish you wouldn't have used this or done this better, but I understand his prominence, and he is a very well-known figure that helped get this started. So I will give credit where credit is due. So one of the things that we kind of talked about beforehand was your name is a very unique name, and you said it was French, Moroccan?
Moroccan, yeah.
See, I remembered. How do you get a French Moroccan name? And you're from Germany too, right?
Yeah, I'm from Germany. Okay, so I'm gonna try to keep this short because there's a lot of history that I quite frankly don't know a lot about. Okay. But so my dad, he used to, like, he's Moroccan. You know, he grew up in Morocco. And no offense to Morocco, but you know, you can't really climb the ladder that high while you're in Africa. You know, unless you're in like South Africa, like the larger places. Yeah. So he eventually decided to migrate into Germany. That's where he met my mother, and they married and all of that sort of stuff. And Morocco is, or like the area that he was from, it used to be, I don't know what the proper term is, but the French people were there.
Okay. So it used to be like a French colony.
Yeah, and a lot of people there also speak French. It's kind of like with how in, you know, some parts of the States, you know, people can speak Mexican or Spanish just as well as they can English, or how in Canada a lot of people can speak French. Morocco is kind of like the Canada of Africa, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how they came up with that name. My sister is also called Lila, so we have that. Like we both have the names, and my mother is like super into, like, she's kind of similar to me, where I like culture but not my culture. So
Okay.
I don't really care about Germany. Like I can't really relate to people that run around in dirndls and like go to the Oktoberfest every year. Like that's not really for me. And my mom was similar. Like she doesn't really care too much about German culture. Like she likes a schnitzel, but that's about as far as it goes. So when my dad suggested those name ideas, they were like, yeah, sure. I'm on board. I like exotic names, so that makes sense. So that's kind of how that came to be.
Okay. So one of the things you mentioned is, did you grow up in Germany your entire life?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that I've known, because I've actually, believe it or not, I've had a lot of German guests on this show. I think it's
Yeah, I saw
right.
you
So
at Promise.
I've had Promise, Baroy, Amazing so far, and I have another German guest coming up here soon, as well as so far. Germany is my go-to country right now for guests. I'm loving it. But one of the things I've noticed, kind of with you compared to some of the other guests that I've had, is your accent seems very distinct and not as thick. So I didn't know if it was maybe the area you grew up, or
No, it actually isn't. So I mentioned earlier how I never really had a connection to Germany, and I quite frankly don't really care too much about the country besides having proper healthcare and that sort of stuff. But even when I was so when I was young, I wasn't exactly the kind of guy that would go to a game store and purchase games. Okay.
Okay, so what kind of guy were you?
I was the kind of guy that would so this is kind of an interesting story actually, but back then we went to a Toys R Us to get like birthday presents. My sister got a Nintendo DS, I got a PlayStation 2, and in Morocco or in countries like Morocco, it is very easy to get modifications for gaming consoles. So I got a modification that like one of those little chips they solder into it that pretty much allows you to play games that weren't licensed, right?
Okay.
Which pretty much means you can download them online. It's not super legal, but super old, so I don't really care. But the thing is, it's very difficult to find games in German language because most of those pirated copies were in English. So and I did spend pretty much most of my time there. I wasn't super social in school. Like again, I didn't really care about German people too much. So I played those English games. And honestly, for most of my life, I listened to those video game characters talk English most of the time. And when I started getting into movies, when I would watch movies, I would also usually watch them in English because I hate lip syncing or like the voice dubbing. So most of the media content that I consumed was English. And as I mentioned earlier, while I did play with some friends from school, I didn't really care too much about German people, and I always looked, when I was gaming, more towards international communities. And as I mentioned, World of Warcraft was one of the biggest games, and for a while as well, I didn't have a lot of money. So for some parts, I played on private servers, which there were some German ones, but most of them were just international. So when I played WoW, I was talking to people who spoke English. When I was watching movies, they were in English because I hated, voice dubs. When I was playing games, they were in English because I couldn't be bothered to buy German games. And so throughout all of this, pretty much the only time I was really exposed to the German language is while I was at school, or when I messed up and my parents were giving me shit for it. But for like 6 to 8 hours a day, I didn't really hear any German, so I kind of just grew to understand English more. And I'm at a point now where even if I would go back to Germany, I'm pretty confident that I would mess up a lot. Like I've tried when I was talking to Promise recently, and it's really annoying because I always have to switch my keyboard over so I can use the umlaute, like the letters with the dots above them. And I tried to like I thought of the English sentence and I tried to translate it into German, but I just kind of it sounded a little shite, to be honest. Like I couldn't really form German sentences that well anymore. So I think I'm kind of starting to unlearn the language a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm sure it'll come back. But yeah, I don't have I still have an accent, obviously, because I still grew up talking German in school. But I would say compared to other Germans, my accent is a little different.
Yeah, it from my experience so far, I would definitely agree. And that was one of the things that I first noticed when you started talking. I was like, wow, if I wouldn't have like done any research, I would have been like, there's no way this guy's from Germany. I don't know where he's from, but I don't think he's from Germany based on the things that I've learned. So you mentioned that growing up in school that you didn't really like to associate with your like the German culture. So that must have made school very interesting. So what kind of a student were you going through school?
Okay, so it's very interesting because the person that I used to be is very opposite to the person that I'm now. Actually,
well, I think that what's cool about that though is when we look at that is most people change over time, and so seeing where someone starts out from and seeing where they are now, I think is an important distinction that we should make.
Yeah. So while I was in school, I was the kid that I tried to pass, and I did pass. Okay. But the only way that I passed was through okay, so I didn't pass school because I was smart or because I studied a lot. As a matter of fact, I think for most of high school, I didn't turn in like any homework at all. And the only way that I kind of made my way up there is I don't want to sound like too full of myself, but I think I had a relatively smart approach to school because I realized that it doesn't really matter what teachers are very subjective most of the time when it comes to grading their students. And if a teacher likes you, even if you mess up in a test, they will help you out of it if they think that you're worth it. So what I was doing, instead of spending my time studying for tests, what I mostly focused on is doing extra work, if that makes sense. So English class and French classes were usually pretty easy because I'm very good at just kind of copying pronunciation. So just by being able to pronounce French properly, my French teacher thought I was a god at the language, even though I had no idea what I was doing. And same thing with English. My pronunciation honestly just kind of carried me through there most of the time. But for the other things like history and that sort of stuff, I was asking the teacher to hold presentations, and I think I held a lot of presentations. And presentations in school are kind of like VOD reviews in teams, where if a player does it, he kind of earns a favor with the coach because it comes off very good. And if you go to a teacher and you tell them, hey, I want to hold a presentation, what they're going to think is, oh, great, I don't have anything, I don't have to do anything for 45 minutes. He's going to take care of it. And there's initiative. So I would do that. And I was always extremely good at presenting stuff. I was always really good at it. So I was presenting garbage very professionally in school. Very, very professionally. So I always used to get straight A's on those presentations, just because I gave off the impression that I knew what I was doing, even though I was just reading Wikipedia articles, pretty much. And that managed to... And because of that, a lot of teachers just didn't want to see me fail because they thought, oh, he's kind of lazy, but, he's really good, like when he puts his mind to it. So that's kind of how I got my way through school. And the reason I mentioned earlier why it's so interesting, how I was so in school, I already realized that I was pretty good at presenting stuff, but I used to play League of Legends a lot with friends. And if you know anything about the League of Legends community, it's not exactly great. No. And if you would tell myself from back then that I would one day end up like coaching an esport, I'd call you crazy because I used to play with this little group of friends in League, and I was insanely toxic. Like I was the guy that was just getting account after account because he would get banned for calling people slurs pretty much. And whenever I would lose, I would just start flaming people, and I would make up excuses, and I would do like 1v1s against friends. And when I would end up losing them, I was like, it wasn't very pretty, and I was doing everything but kind of admitting that I was bad at the game. And that's very interesting because now I'm the exact opposite. Now I see myself in other players, and I think that's very beneficial to me because those traits that I exhibited when I was younger are traits that I can see in a lot of players in the scene today. And I can target those specific traits, and I can just get rid of them as soon as possible before they manifest themselves into something more permanent. And I think that's very interesting because it kind of gave me a lot of motivation, seeing that if I could change from that toxic League of Legends shithead that one-tricked Katarina to now, a coach, if I could make that drastic of a transition, I know that everyone can make that drastic of a decision. And I would say that just by talking to a lot of coaches, some of the coaches I've talked to, they tend to give up with players relatively quickly.
Yes.
They just say they're uncoachable, he's not worth their time. But I look at that player and I just look for a spark that he wants to improve. But a lot of players just suck at showing that off, that they want to improve. And so I can't give out any specific names, but I would say there have been like at least 2 players in my career that pretty much everyone has seen as completely, lost causes, that have made a complete 180, because I was the first person that really realized that, they do want to get better, and they do realize that their current behavior just isn't optimal, and they've changed their mindset, and they ended up being some of the most dedicated players that I know.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. What I've always told people is because I used to work with drug addicts. So from my perspective, I've seen some pretty drastic 180s that have occurred. So in my opinion, anyone can change. It just depends on the amount of time you're willing to put in. And I think that's a big thing that I used to always tell teams is like, listen, this is where I think they are. This is how much change I think you might see. And I think it's, like there's some people where you get to a point where it's going to be very slow. And it's whether or not the rate of investment is worth it. For them, I think, which I personally don't. I wish we could just like work with everyone and give them the amount of time, but that is not how the world works. But yeah, I would say that I 100% agree that there is very few people that I have met who are incapable of changing, and I can count on a hand. And it was because they had some really serious, like, sociopathic issues that like, they would kill their children and be okay with it. Those are the people who I'm like, quite literally, one hand can count how many people that is there. So I really kind of like that approach of like, hey, listen, anyone can change, anyone can improve. So you mentioned being kind of like very toxic growing up, especially related to video games. And you mentioned not really, you had some friends in school, but you weren't really that close to them. So what kind of, when I say this, what type of person were you in kind of school? What about in like a social setting where it sounds like you didn't really want to associate with people at all or deal with them or do anything?
Yeah, well, I mean, I did have like 2 friends, and then like some people that I was like, I wouldn't like, I visited them like maybe once or twice. But I would like, I'm not in touch with them anymore. I'm pretty much only in touch with 2 people from high school now. So I'm not sure about this because it was never diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure that I had some form of autistic behavior while I was in school. Like, I was very, very dysfunctional socially. I was very, very bad on picking up at social cues. I made a lot of people mad and hurt their feelings because I didn't understand that would be it. And it was very frustrating for me because when I was talking to people, I just like, I wasn't really the most popular person, and the only people that I was really close with was over video games because we both liked the hobby, and so we got to talk a little bit more. And eventually they just realized that sometimes I say really stupid stuff. But most of the others, they just think, okay, what the hell? This guy's kind of rude and weird. And like looking back on it, I cringe at a lot of the things that I've done, and I can definitely understand where they're coming from. But it just kind of seemed normal to me. That was the thing actually, where when I was a child, I used to have this weird, like almost like a tick, where whenever I was watching TV and a new program came on, I had to shout through the entire house and tell my mother that this particular program is on, and I wouldn't stop shouting until she would tell me, okay, so I know that she heard it. Or when I was walking through the street, this is something that still kind of bothers me today, and I don't know if it's normal or not. When I was walking down the street, and there are lanterns, like those street lamps on both ends of the road, and sometimes I would walk past 2 street lamps on my left side and only 1 on the right side. So I would have to kind of look around put the right street lamp out of my field of view and then back into the field of view, so as if I've seen it. Okay, this is super awkward, I know.
No, it's good.
But I don't know. It's just kind of it tilts me kind of. So I had to like make sure that the amount of street lamps I walked past were like the same, and like a lot of that kind of weird stuff.
Very close to an obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah,
Not
I
that I'm
think
a therapist, but it was very similar to having some OCD tendencies there.
Yeah, it is pretty. I'm pretty sure I had OCD. I'm actually pretty confident. But mental health was never really a thing in like my family, because in Morocco, mental health doesn't really, or like it exists, but it's not as progressed, I guess. And certain parts of my family that had mental health issues were also people that, you know, they drank a lot of alcohol and all of that stuff. My family never really had anything to do with it. They were really just family by last name, pretty much. So my family never really took mental health issues super serious, because they thought, oh, the only people who get mental health issues are people that take drugs and that sort of stuff. So yeah, that never really, you know, I never really got diagnosed or anything, or even bothered with it. And I didn't talk a lot to my parents about like any of that stuff either, because, you know, they're gonna be like, okay, good to know, thanks for letting me know, fascinating. But so that happened. But yeah, so kind of to go back to the thing in school, I was talking about like the weird behavior. So I never really got along with people, and I guess I was also bullied a lot. But I think that's kind of normal amongst people that, you know, spend 6 to 8 hours a day just playing video games. Like, you know, I'm not the kind of guy that went to parties or anything. Towards the end of my school life, when I would say I became a little bit more normal socially, like I started to learn how talking to people worked, essentially. Like I had to teach that myself because it wasn't intuitive to me. That's when I could start like going to like people's birthday parties, and I realized I didn't really like it all that much, to be honest. So that was kind of very relaxing, because I wasn't really missing out on too much. You know, it's but I can say that towards the end of my school life, I guess I could experience what it was like to be a normal high schooler. But like during the earlier phases, when I was kind of idiotic, it wasn't as pretty.
Okay. So you mentioned bullying, and it's something I want to cover on, because you mentioned a lot of people in gaming, it's probably something that's similar. And I think that it's something to talk about, because I think a lot of people go through it, and getting your experience could be beneficial for them. So what was that aspect like for you?
So when I got bullied, I used to just kind of punch people, and it ended up okay, so this is a story that not a lot of people know about, actually. But I used to be in a school. This was like 6th grade or something. That's like after elementary school in Germany. And I would get bullied because it was kind of stupid. And I had one friend in that school. He was called Christopher. Who, no offense to him, I think he also had some sort of like he also showed signs of autism. So we just kind of, you know, we worked really well, and he was the person that like actually introduced me to WoW. If it weren't for him, I probably would have never really gotten into that game. And we were like just kind of chilling, and everything was fine. And then one day, I actually don't know if that was with Christopher. I think it could have been with someone else. I have no idea. Anyways, I was in the break room in school, like where you can just go there, like pool tables and that sort of stuff. And I was playing darts with like one of my friends, and it was really nice actually, because I didn't really hang out with a lot of people or like do a lot of stuff. I would just eat my food, and you know, we didn't really have phones back then. You know, like you know, not everyone had their iPhones so they could check Instagram. So I usually just sat there in the break room and I kind of spectated other people, you know, playing stuff, and I like listened around. What are people talking about? Because I was like very like self-conscious about what people thought of me. So I always wanted to be aware of everything that's going on. So I was playing darts, and this group of kids came around that, you know, I guess were bullying me, and they just stood to me. I was just having fun. I was, you know, chilling with a friend. This didn't happen very often. I was playing darts, and then this group of kids just comes around, and they're like shit talking me for being bad at darts. And I was like, I don't care. I'm playing darts. Like, let me have fun. Who cares if I'm, you know, hitting bullseyes all the time? And they actually, like, they just kept going and kept going and kept going, because as you probably know, kids can be a little ruthless sometimes.
Yes.
So what I did, and this is, I kid you not, this is actually super anime. Like, this was so freaking anime. So I was sitting there throwing darts, not hitting anything. As soon as they came around, they started teasing me. Okay. What ended up happening is I just started to like kind of like trigger. Like, I stopped really caring anymore because there was all of this built up aggression, and I didn't really have an outlet where I could let that out. Because I wasn't talking to anyone about this. So I kid you not, I did like a 160-degree turn, and I threw that dart straight into the group, and I was very close to hitting my first bullseye. Let's phrase it that way. And I shouldn't be laughing about this, but screw those kids, okay? And obviously because it's like a school, they didn't have the sharp darts. They had like rounded thingies, right? But that didn't stop me because it still ended up sticking in his head, which didn't look super pretty. Long story short, my parents did a little bit of their parent magic, so I didn't get into too much trouble, but I did have to leave the school and get transferred to another one, which in retrospect was actually the best thing that could have happened to me, because on that school, it kind of allowed me a fresh start because no one knew me, and I had an easier time kind of getting friends. It was still a little bit awkward. I didn't get too many friends, but I had more than one friend, and people who I weren't friends with, they at least somewhat liked me. And as I went into, even higher grades of school, it just got progressively better and better and better and better. So yeah, I used to be kind of a shithead all the way back, but I started like making continuous progress. And I think that's kind of one of the things that fascinates me about coaching, because I know that if my bigger brother, he was very similar to me while in school. He always used to call trouble. I'm pretty sure that, he knocked a few teeth out whenever he got into trouble. And let's just say that he didn't get transferred to a new school and he didn't end up coaching video games. He kind of went down a worse path. Yeah. And I don't want to go too much into it, but let's just say he's doing fine now. It's not as bad anymore, but I'm pretty sure that like he regrets what he has done, because it hasn't done him like too much good in terms of career opportunities and relationships and friend circles and all of that stuff. So it's very interesting to see that that could have happened to me. Like, I could have been the person that would be around the circles of people that, throw rocks into windows and get drunk on like Wednesday nights and like end up in the police station and that sort of shit. But, I didn't, because most of my time I didn't really spend outside. Most of my time I went playing video games, and video games were like kind of an outlet for me. Like, I'm pretty sure that if I couldn't have played video games, I'd probably done some stuff that, would be pretty hard to recover from. And again, like, obviously, I regret all of that stuff, and I'm not that person anymore. Like, looking back on it, I just cringe because, like, what the hell? But yeah, like it again just kind of showed me that like how helpful video games were to me, and it showed me that just because two people start at the same point doesn't mean that they'll have to end their journey at the same point. Like, everyone can kind of take their own path. So that's kind of how I look at it with the players that I work with. Like, I don't really care about what happened in their past unless it's like kind of relevant. All I care about is which direction they want to go moving forward, and then we just take that direction. And the only time I would use things from their past or things that I figure out about them personally, certain traits that they have, is in order to make it clear to them that if they don't change like their attitude or their work ethic or all that sort of stuff, they're going to miss out on like a huge opportunity, and they're going to regret this for a very, very long time. But I guess those are kind of my motivations into getting behind coaching and learning about all of this stuff, and learning how to interact with people and try to change them and try to understand them and try to work with them moving forward.
Mm-hmm. I think what's hilarious when you tell your story is that I'm looking back and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of similarities that happened to like me, because I was not very social, which if you think about my job now is kind of hilarious, because I quite literally have done presentations for National Drug Court Conference and been in front of hundreds of people, and I love being in front of people now. I like interacting with people, but growing up I very much did not like talking to anyone. I got picked on, I got bullied. It was not good. I didn't get kicked out. But it was fairly common that when you got bullied, that there was fights that would happen, and they weren't bad. I remember one kid getting his face bashed in my school with an ice chunk because of some stuff that was going on, and everyone knew who did it. And it was like, guess what? We're not going to talk about it. We don't know who did it, even though we all knew who did it. And that's just kind of the way that it works growing up in school, and it can be really, really like crappy. Growing up in school, and it's good to know that other people kind of go through that and they make it through and they still succeed in life, which I think is an important aspect going in here. So kind of delving into that a little bit, how many brothers or sisters do you have? Do you just have the one brother, or do you have more than that?
So I have my bigger brother. I have a bigger sister. They're kind of like, we didn't really have a lot to do with them. Sometimes we would go over to their house, they would take care of us.
Okay. So they're fairly older.
Yeah, they're much older. I don't know how old exactly, but I think they're in their 30s right now. I have a twin sister, so she's the same age. We were born on the same day. She's doing stuff right now. She's actually an artist, so she's trying to get into like graphics design. So she's, she wasn't as successful in cheating her way through school, if that makes sense. Because she was always like more of a creative person. She was really good in art class though. I have a little sister. I don't know what grade she's in right now. I have no idea actually. I think she's still in elementary school. She's 9 or 8 right now. I kind of lose track of ages. Doesn't mean that I don't like her, obviously. And I also have a little brother who is, I think, 3 weeks old now. So that kind of is
you have a lot of family.
Yeah, so that is about. I haven't seen my brother yet, my little brother, because obviously I'm in Canada and they're in Germany, so it's a little bit tough to just go and visit. But yeah, so that's kind of the whole shebang. Okay.
Parents still together?
No. So my original parents, they're not together anymore. But it's not like they left on bad terms. To be honest, it's just that my mother has like some health issues. And I don't want to like go too much into their personal life because I don't think they want to share too much. But I do have a stepmother, and I live with my dad and my stepmother and my real mother, I guess, the one that actually squeezed me out. Yeah. She's living very close, like 5-minute walking distance. I can visit her at any time.
Okay, so looking to go through school, one of the things that I've learned about the German school system, there's kind of different tiers once you get into high school, I think. And there's like 3 different tiers of schooling. So this is how many German guests I've had. Which tier did you fall into? Okay,
so interesting, actually. Dude, I'm remembering so much stuff right now, actually. So I was in elementary school, and at the end of elementary school, usually the teacher kind of sets where each particular student goes to, right? And he wanted to send me to Realschule. So you have the bottom, which is Hauptschule, like it translates to like main school. You have like real school, and then you have the gymnasium at the top, right? So he wanted to send me to real school. And no offense, but people who go to like Realschule or Hauptschule, so like the 2 bottom ones, like at that point, like you might as well just skip and just do an internship or I don't know what the English term for that is, like an apprenticeship. Like an apprenticeship, yeah. So because those kind of school, like they don't really do a whole lot for you. Pretty much the only thing that was worth pursuing was the gymnasium. So my teacher wanted me to send me to Realschule because I was socially awkward. He worked with my brother before, so he figured, oh, okay, this is his brother 2.0. But my dad, again, and I think I learned a lot of like hard skills about how to navigate people and kind of find success and like be a little ruthless sometimes. He just went to the teacher and he did his thing. And he managed to convince him to send me to like the gymnasium. My teacher wasn't a huge fan. He thought I was going to like just like fail out of it and be demoted to real school. But I mean, my dad in the end was right. I wasn't like super dedicated and like super enthusiastic about school, but I did know how to make it through school, without getting like dropped out or failing any classes or anything like that.
So you mentioned one of the things that your teacher was kind of looking at you as brother 2.0. Did you live in the shadow of your brother growing up?
No, not really, actually. So when I was very young, like 6 years old, my brother actually used to. I was living with my real mother. What do you call your maiden?
Biological mom is what I always.
Yeah,
my parents are split up too. I used to just say bio mom.
So I was living with my biological mom at that point, and my dad was actually living somewhere else with my stepmom. So it was kind of reversed, essentially. And I was living with my mom, and my brother was living there as well. I'm actually currently living, or like in Germany, I'm living in my brother's former room before he moved out. And he would play like Counter-Strike 1.6 and WoW. And one fun memory that I have actually is I was in the room with him with my sister, and he used to watch Saw 4. And he figured that he's gonna see shit like this anyways, so he might as well just see it now and be done with it. So we kind of, I didn't really watch the movie. It was more like, kind of hiding in the bed, and then I would go out, and all of a sudden this guy has a hatchet in his skull, and like exactly kind of like this, yeah. So I think I still appreciate it though, because he was a very big contrast to my regular upbringing. So I had this kind of triangle going on. So my dad and my stepmom, they were very like orderly and go to university, have success, like your typical kind of strict parents. My mom was more of a, I guess, creative parent, where she's like, you should pursue your passion, you should do what you want in life. Obviously still try your best in school, but you don't have to become a lawyer or something like this, or a doctor. And then my brother was the last piece of the triangle, who was pretty much like kind of the rebellious part. Kind of, and with these three sides, I think they kind of showed me each part of the spectrum, and I could choose whatever was most beneficial, right? So my dad showed me that it's very important to be like hardworking, and he taught me a lot about how to succeed, I guess, without getting into too much specifics, like how to talk to people, how to network properly, what is really important, I guess. My mom was the one telling me that, I should pursue whatever I'm really interested in. And my brother was the one that told me that, like, you just have to like take some risks, and that in the end, it's fine if something doesn't work out, because you can probably recover from that. So I would say I have my work ethic from my dad. The fact that I did pursue esports and quit university, I don't think that would have been possible without my mother, kind of ingraining that in me. And some of the kind of riskier decisions that I've made during my career. If you check my Twitter, you probably know what risky things I might have done. That's something that I got from my brother. And like, so far, all of them have been right. Like, my dad has been right in that, like, having proper work ethic gets you far. My mother has been right that pursuing what you love is in the end going to be better than just forcing yourself through something. And my brother was right that even if you mess up, it's not really the end of the world, and you can always recover, as long as you put in the effort. So, yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned that your brother went through struggles, and we're not going to really talk about that. Is he a really close figure to your life now?
Not really. The last time I actually saw him was when we got him out of jail. So, like, it wasn't jail, really. He was just like, I think he was just in there for like questioning or giving testimony or something.
That would be,
I'm not
in the States, that would be jail, because there's actually in the States there's two different, there's like county jail, then there's like jail, then there's like prison. Jail is where most people go for holding.
Yeah, he wasn't in prison. He was just in jail for like a night or something, because there was like some drama with like his ex, and like there was like a fight, and he like threw his ex's phone on the ground, and then the ex was mad, and so he came in, and they like, I think in the end he just like paid for the phone, and like that's pretty, so it's not like he went out and like killed someone or like sold drugs or anything. He was just a rebel. He was doing stuff that you don't want your kids to really imitate, but he's still a good person. He's not going to like actually hurt someone beyond what anyone else would do.
Yeah, understandable. So kind of moving on from that, and we look at school and you being in gymnasium. and going from there. Now, you had mentioned in some of your interviews that you really wanted to work at Blizzard, and I'm assuming that's why you pursued computer science as a degree choice for college. When you were leaving university, did you want to go to school?
I did, but while I was in university, it was very, very tough. Like, I thought that it would be easier because I'm like very good at programming and like logical thinking and that sort of stuff. But what ended up kind of killing me was the math part of it, because a lot of the things that they were teaching weren't very intuitive. And I'm not saying that what they were teaching was bad or anything. It's really just that I have like a very specific way of thinking, and I wasn't really getting what they were trying to explain. And one of the issues in university is that if you have a question, you can't just go to the professor. You know, he has a lot of students. So the problem was the only other person that I went to that university with was someone from like the not so close friend circle. So I mentioned in early school, I had like 2 close friends and then a few other people like outside who were like, so I went to university with him, and he wasn't like he liked the idea of studying computer science, but I think once the reality hit him, he started looking for alternatives, and I think he's now trying to become a paramedic. Actually, he has since left university. So I didn't really have like, you know, a lot of support, and in university, my traditional strategy that I used to get through high school didn't really work. So I could have made it, but I was at a very, very slow pace. Like, it would have taken me like years to actually finish that degree, just because I didn't get most of that. So it wasn't intuitive to me. But while I was doing that, I had this bet with a friend that I met online. He quit a comp game, and he realized that Overwatch players are kind of trash. So we made the bet of, okay, let's just do a YouTube channel, try to teach people. Whoever gets the most subscribers wins. I won, needless to say. And it kind of just started growing from there. And eventually, when I started my Patreon and I started doing private coaching, that's when I started toying with the idea of not going to university anymore. And the great thing about uni is that all of the classes and all of the courses are uploaded online. The only time you would actually have to go there is in order to do an exam. Yeah. Right. Other than that, you can just do everything from home, which isn't really recommended. You should go there if you really want to succeed, because, you know, online classes are, you know, but that's kind of what I did. And as I did that, you know, like the university thing kind of just kept falling apart more and more. Like, I could recover from it if I really wanted to, but at that point, I kind of started to consider this Overwatch thing. You know, it's a new game. The scene hasn't really established itself. I'm kind of like the second generation. Like, I'm not like the OGs, like Taimu and that stuff. I'm like the generation after that. So that's when I started committing to that. And eventually I stopped, you know, doing the online courses, and my parents didn't really knew anything about it because I knew that my parents wouldn't be like on board with it. So I wanted to make sure that before I like actually tell them, I had to have something solid. And that solid thing would be like an actual income. So once I had an income that was decent, that's when I kind of went to my parents and I was like, hey, you know, I'm really gonna pursue this. And now they're like relatively supportive, obviously, because I'm actually signed. I have like a proper salary. I'm sending, you know, some of that money back to kind of help them out. So now they're like completely fine with it. But I did hide some stuff from them because I was very confident that I would get to the point where I am now. I was very confident that if I put my mind to it, I could get here. But my parents wouldn't be as confident because they had no idea about anything of it. So I just wanted to save them from all of the stress, right? I knew I was going to make it anyways, at least to this point. So they could kind of rest easy and they wouldn't have to worry about me being in this limbo between not going to university and not actually making a lot of money. So yeah, that's kind of how that transition worked. It wasn't very transparent.
Okay, so I have a bunch of questions for this kind of like era of your life. So first of all, the college experience. Because I obviously went to college and graduated and stuff like that. And college was a very odd thing. I learned a lot of things about myself. Did you find you weren't there very long? You said 1 semester?
1 semester, yeah.
Yeah, so you weren't there very long. Was there anything beneficial about going to college that you gained out of it?
I learned that the movie trope of shit canteen food is a lie. because the food there was really good. Besides that,
Freshman 15 is a real thing.
Besides that, what did I learn? I learned, I guess, that. Okay, so before in my life, I was kind of babysitted, especially in school. Like everything is like people want to see you succeed, so they help you. In college, you don't really have that anymore. That was the point where I realized that all of a sudden I'm not learning these things for grades anymore. I am learning these things for an eventual career. When I was in high school and I was learning about where the frick Egypt's capital is, I knew that wasn't really ever going to help me. But all of a sudden, this stuff that I learned, this is stuff that would actually help me, right? And I think it makes me respect people who dropped out of college a little bit more, because the original idea that I had of college dropouts was, they were just lazy, no goods, they're never going to succeed to anything, they just gave up. But now I really understand that. So I still think if someone doesn't make it through high school, they're fucking stupid. Like, go through high school, right? But I don't blame people anymore for not wanting to go through college and instead do something else. Because I realize that college is good, but it is not the be-all, end-all, and it is not for everyone, right? And you're not stupid for dropping out of college. Whereas, again, you're still stupid if you drop out of high school. Don't drop out of high school, because that is actually like something that you should have ideally when you're applying somewhere. But at college, like I just realized, there's more to life than just following this straight path. And I really that's one of the things that I like about esports as a career is you're not on rails.
Yeah.
Where you progress, the directions you're taking are all completely up to you. I could have just focused on my private coaching. Like, I don't want to go too much into how I made with private coaching, but I don't think I'm going to be able to make as much money with being assigned coach for an esports team within the next 1 or 2 years that I have made with the private coaching. Like, private coaching is ridiculously lucrative. There's no way. But it's also kind of boring eventually, just coaching platinum players all the time. So you want to progress. So I could have pursued that, and I would be very well off right now, probably. And I wouldn't really have to worry about any. Okay, I wouldn't be a millionaire. Okay, I should I'm kind of overselling it a little bit, but I would be in a position where I wouldn't really have to worry. Like, I could start building up a little bit. If the game would survive for 5 to 6 years, I think I would be able to have a very smooth transition into whatever I would want to do afterwards. Or I, take the path that I ended up taking, and I said, okay, I don't really want to just call this my peak. I don't want the peak of my career to be coaching platinum Overwatch players, right? I wanted to go higher because I knew that I could go higher. And that's not me trying to sound overconfident or arrogant. It's just me being very aware of how much progress I've made since I was young, and realizing that if I can do that, I can probably do it even more. And when I was playing League of Legends with friends, they were super into the esports team. And interestingly enough, I couldn't care enough about esports. I was always the guy that wanted to play the game and not actually spectate it. I don't know why they liked it so much. Now I do. Back then, they were talking past me. They were like, TSM, TSM. So, yeah, it was pretty cringe. But so they were super, super into it. But I wasn't, and now I really, really am into it. But back then, they had this idea of esports professional players as these prodigies that understood everything. And that was my understanding as well. I used to lack a lot of confidence because I thought that these esports professionals are all prodigies. But no offense, a lot of the players, even those in the Overwatch League, they're not prodigies. They're early, they have a lot of previous experience. And I am very confident that 3 to 4 years from now, 90% of the players that currently are in the Overwatch League won't be there anymore. They'll be replaced by the more long-lasting talent. There will still be some of these old school players around, but I think a lot of them are just there because they were the first ones to show up. Mm-hmm. And they're still good players, of course, right? But I as I climbed up and I started talking to more of the people higher up in esports, I realized that they weren't these super, super smart. They're still smart people, but a lot of them just didn't take it as serious as I thought that they would. A lot of them almost still treat it like a hobby, right? Or they have very, very weird approaches to like there's some coaches that I've talked to that had very, very weird approaches. Like they were very disrespectful to their players, and they didn't really consider what they were saying. And they were like, and it was very weird seeing that, because I thought, like, this is a contenders level coach. This is a contenders player. They must be here for a reason. And I that's something that like has always accompanied me in life. I always thought that the people who were one stage above me were people that were super smart, super hardworking, super talented. There's no way that I can go there. But that notion has been proven wrong so many times in my life now, because as soon as I reached that next level and I started interacting with people at that level, I realized these people are beatable. When I was a silver player in League of Legends, I thought that platinum players were gods. Once I made it into platinum, I realized, no, they're not. They're not even taking the game that serious. And that's kind of something that has been motivating me. I don't know how Overwatch League coaches coach, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if they know what they're talking about or not, right? It's very difficult. But my high expectations of the next level have been like very disappointing in the past. And that kind of motivates me, that even though I don't know how good those Overwatch League coaches are, I believe that if I work hard enough, that I can at least match their level, if not even surpass them. And I think that's even something that a lot of players struggle with. There's this whole thing around Korean players, for example, where people think, like Korean players, they're like these gods that have like 3 calculators running in their head, formulating complex algebraic stuff like that. But now I know that chances are that probably isn't true. I don't know, but chances are that probably isn't true. They're still just as beatable. And I think a lot of players could get rid of this irrational high expectation of Korean players. It would be a lot easier for them to surpass them as well if they would just work hard enough. But a lot of players are just giving up, or they don't have the confidence to go against it. And I don't want to be like that. I hear of coaches like Krusty, or Coach 815 for London Spitfire, or Pavane for NYXL. And a lot of people are like Wizard Young, and a lot of people think that they're like these big brain coaches. And I think that they're very smart, but I no longer think that they're unsurpassable. And I no longer think that the best, that becoming the best coach within an esport, or the best player within esport, is exclusive to people from Korea, as long as you don't think it is exclusive to people from Korea. So that is my goal. I don't just want to be like an Overwatch League coach. I want to be the Overwatch League coach, if that makes sense. I want people to be like, oh, like that's Pavane, but he's not ioStux, right? Yeah. And some of that ambition, I think, also comes from the lack of success that I had in school, because in school I never really got the affirmation or the respect from a lot of the other students, because I didn't interact a lot with them and they thought I was awkward. So maybe it's even a little bit like, maybe I'm even trying to like compensate for that a little bit, because I wasn't really the most successful student or the most popular student. Like I wasn't, if there were lists, and we didn't really have lists in the German schools, that like the girls would make, I don't think I would be like very high on any of those lists. And now I'm like, the only reason I wasn't high on those lists is because I didn't believe that I could be. Yeah. But now I believe that I could be high on one of those lists. And so far, I've been on an upward trajectory, and every step that I take, I am 10 times the coach that I used to be on XL2. Like, I'm going to say that very, very bluntly. I am 100% confident that if I could travel back in time and work with XL2 from the start, we would have beat Fusion University. There is no doubt in my mind. Yeah. But the whole situation with XL2 has taught me so much about how important it is to just value yourself and value your opinion and value your experience. And me thinking that I couldn't be a great coach, or me thinking that, like, me overestimating how smart players and coaches were what essentially stopped me from figuring out how valuable my experience could actually be. And that's something that I changed with Uprising Academy. And obviously last season we were only 5th to 8th place, which isn't as good as 2nd place as with XL2. but my performance and what I have done with the players on Uprising Academy, because in Boston Uprising, results are nice with the Academy team, but results are not the focus of the Academy team. The focus is always going to be developing Overwatch League level talent. And the progress that I have made with the players on this team is 1,000 times what I managed to accomplish on XL2. Just because for the first time in my professional career working with esports professionals instead of just platinum players, I stopped believing that the players and the coaches were always right. And I started just saying, okay, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm confident enough about my opinion and my experience here that I want you to at least try it. Yeah. And there were so many situations where I told a player, there was an example recently. So obviously we lost Fusions to Boston Uprising, and we were trialing a few main tanks. And I can tell you right now, without giving too much away, the main tank that I have that we picked up as a team, a lot of the players on the team were very skeptical about that pick. Mm-hmm. Pretty much all of them wanted another candidate. But what I would have done previously is I would be like, okay, everyone on the team wants this guy, we're going to pick up this guy. But I picked someone up that I was 100% confident in was the right choice. And I believe that now that I made that decision and I've started working with that player and I just told him what to do because I started believing for once that I know what I am doing. It started kind of proving itself. It started showing itself because we're doing really, really well with him. We're making a lot of progress, right? I can tell you so much. The main tank that we got, he isn't like an Overwatch level main tank or anything. Like he's not someone super popular that a lot of people know, but he's someone that I truly, truly believe in is going to be one of the best main tanks in North America once he actually had the time to kind of, scrim with proper teams for a while. And I think that a lot of the skepticism that a lot of the people in the team had about him are now starting to go. And this wouldn't have happened if I still had that notion of, oh, these are contenders players. Oh, this guy was on the World Cup stage. Oh, these coaches were like super, super good and all of this sort of that stuff. But instead I just thought, okay, these people are good, but I can be better. And this is an opportunity for me to make a decision that they would not have made and to prove to them that I made the right decision.
Yeah. I like that, and we're going to get into some of that philosophy because I want to kind of delve in. But one thing we need to hit on before your Overwatch career even started was the YouTube content, right? You mentioned you started it up for as a bet to do that, which is really cool. What made you decide to go into maybe more of the professional scene rather than doing content?
It's hard to say. I think so when I started making money with the private coaching, I think, so back then, now it's no longer this way, but back then, I was a person that wouldn't really appreciate his own efforts or his own accomplishments unless they were either confirmed by someone else that I respect or were rewarded with materialistic things. So unless someone good was telling me I did good, or someone was, I guess paying me or rewarding me for what I was doing, I wasn't believing in what I was doing. So when I did the private coaching, when I realized how much people were willing to pay me just to have an hour with me, that kind of gave me that confidence that, hey, maybe I could start doing this with even better players and even better players and even better players and kind of move up from there. And obviously, again, since then it has changed. Now I don't really care if, how much people are willing to pay me or like what people think of me. Now the only thing that I care about is my job and if I think what I am doing is the correct decision.
Okay.
And that's kind of how that transition worked.
So I would say that you're a successful content creator, which is in Overwatch, I think there's not a ton. And this is kind of a question I wanted to ask you. So you are also highly involved in Reddit. We have seen posts about that, which is hilarious. One of the questions I wanted to kind of ask you, as someone who I would consider a successful content creator, one of the things you see all the time is like different people being like, we want more Overwatch content. Okay. And you see it all the time. People want to have more Overwatch content. However, there's actually a fair amount of creators out there, Kick Tripod, Yiska, Volamail, me, a couple other people, who we don't get great viewership. So the question is, as someone who lives on the Reddit community, does the Reddit community not actually want more Overwatch content, or is our Overwatch content just fucking bad?
So there are three kinds of content essentially. Yeah. So there's the content that just panders to the audience, where you're telling them what they want to hear essentially.
Yes.
The one YouTube channel that falls into that category
is what,
full
Mickle?
offense is no. That is your Overwatch, for example.
Okay.
They just tell platinum players what they want to hear. They get thousands of views. That's the easy way, right? On the opposite end, you have the people that don't give people what they want to hear, but they give people what they need to hear. And that's kind of where you and Voloman and those people kind of go in, where like what you guys share is extremely valuable, but people get bored by it, I guess. Yeah. Like the only people that like really are attracted to that kind of content are like diehard fans, right? The niche that I went into is somewhere in between. So I didn't just want to blindly give people what they wanted to hear, because that's not really the point of a coach. But I didn't want to give people what they like the kind of boring, not boring facts, but like just the kind of dry, university level presentations. So I went into the niche that combined the two, and that was very, very high spice, rebellious content almost, where I told people what they needed to hear, but I phrased it in a contradictorian way almost, where I didn't just say opinion A, I was saying opinion B is shit, here's opinion A. Mm-hmm. And that got people interested, because all of a sudden listening to my advice wasn't just, I guess, good. All of a sudden it became like a unique thing to do. I think the best example of this actually is my video where I told people to not use voice chat, right? So I could have just made a very objective, boring video, like pros and cons, why you shouldn't do it. I did not do that, because I knew that the people who really needed that advice wouldn't click on that video if they were, or they wouldn't really watch through it. Instead, I made a video that eventually, if you know EVA, the Mercy player, right? That video ended up on his stream, and he gave me a lot of shit for it. And that's when I knew that I succeeded, because that video got the views that I wanted it to get, and I got that message across. And because of the way that I structured it, a lot of people actually ended up trying it. And those people who tried it, they realized, okay, maybe this guy has a point. I want to kind of experiment a bit more with this and see if this is, something I want to look into. So I, at the expense of public relation, at the expense of respect it's a resource, essentially. People's attention is always a resource. And the only way that you can have one group of people listen to you is by making sure that they know that another group of people wouldn't listen to you, right? If we look at it from, and a lot of the content that is posted onto Reddit from you or Voloman, it's very neutral content.
Yes.
Right? And people, while only the diehard fans are interested in neutral content, the majority of the fans, they're not interested in neutral content. They are interested in content that is extremely unique and has an actual viewpoint to it. So if you want to get the attention of Dallas Fuel fans, you don't get the attention by them by posting a post. Oh, these are the top 3, new DPS players that Dallas might look at. Nobody really cares about that, right? What they really want is content that you can still give off that same message, like players that they should look into, but you kind of have to shift the attention towards something that they want to hear. So it's kind of hard to give a...
So rather than saying these are the 3 DPS players, you'd say these are the 3 players at Dallas Fuel that need to go.
Yeah, exactly. So something like this. Because, and while you're doing that, you could start giving examples. So you could say, we think, I don't want to point anyone out, but we need to take this player from Dallas Fuel. He needs to go. You kind of go into why. And then you add, by the way, these are the players that I would replace them with. Because that's when they will get interested. And again, fans of that particular player are going to hate you for it. But the thing is that first impressions are very important. And you are more interested in people that blindly follow you once they get their first impression than people that blindly hate you after first impressions, right? So you start building up this, like the growing viewership. Essentially, like that's kind of how you start getting higher. And when I had my YouTube channel, I had a very consistent and steady growth because I always tried to structure my content in that way, where I wasn't trying to cater to like the entire audience. I was always aiming at specific, and I was picking them out, because once you have those people, okay, let's say you're saying that player A on Dallas Fuel needs to go, and a lot of people agree with you, and they're going to follow you. Now, let's say you make another opinion piece, player B has to go. But a lot of the people that you started attracting with your first content, right, they disagree with that. But the thing is, just because they disagree with that, they won't stop following you.
Yeah.
Right? And then you make another piece of content, and maybe they'll agree with this, and you'll get more people onto it. So it is a lot easier to keep people to watch, or like you have to not. There are so many people in the Overwatch community that, in order to be successful, you don't need to attract all of them, right? You can expend some people if it helps you gain the attention of the other people, until you reach a point where you reach mainstream level appeal, which means that a large amount of people are going to listen to you and watch you, even if they don't like you or even if they disagree with you. Okay, so one example I think is Slasher, right? So he's not really too much into Overwatch anymore, but he is one of those journalists that he has very, very controversial opinions. Yes. He is, I think, a perfect example of this. And the reason that he is so successful is because he doesn't care about making people unhappy. He only cares, the only thing he cares about is that making those people unhappy is making other people happy. So when he posts something, a lot of people disagree with it, right? They think it's extremely controversial. They think he's talking out of his ass, but that doesn't really matter because they still care about those tweets that he sends or those articles that he writes, right? So he has that audience, which in the end really is the goal. And once you have that audience, that's when you can start going from just farming mode, where you try to make these controversial pieces, and that's when you can start shifting to content that actually matters, because at that point you already have all of these eyes on you, and it takes a long time for those eyes to actually get off you if you make really boring content repeatedly. So whenever I made content, I always used to differentiate between two kinds of videos. Videos that I think people needed to actually like that was just pure, raw, very good content, and content whose sole purpose was to just attract new people. And it's always a little, like, you always need to experiment a little bit, because sometimes I would make a video and I was trying to attract a certain audience, and I would attract that audience, but I realized I don't really want that audience, because they're not a good resource to have. For example, I made a series on YouTube called Aim Secrets. Yeah. The point of that series was not to share valuable advice. And I'm telling you right now that, quite frankly, the people that watch that series from start to finish, they're not going to be super successful. Because if you're the kind of player that spends 6 hours just watching a playlist all about aim videos, your priorities aren't really where they should be. That's not what Overwatch is about, right? But it did get a lot of views. I think the entire playlist has like 800,000 views or something insane like this. But I realized that ever since I uploaded the series, I've had people DM me or like post on my Discord with questions that are irrelevant. What sense should I use? Is my monitor too far away? And all of that stuff. And that's when I realized that, sure, I got views off of that, and I increased my audience, and I have the attention of a lot of people, but I don't really care about the attention of these people, right? So yeah, to I guess summarize, you need to figure out what people you actually want to attract. You need to find the opposite of those people, like people that disagree with it, and then you need to cater content around those people. So it's kind of like indirectly amassing an audience without ever directly addressing that audience. Because if you tell people to subscribe to you, they're not going to subscribe to you just because you said it, unless like they already planned on doing it, right? So the only way that they're going to do that is if it comes from them, right? So most of the people that like are in my Discord and stuff, I've never like directly addressed, but I've addressed people that they didn't like. A lot of the people, I'd say like 80% of the people that like follow me are just people that really, really didn't like your Overwatch, and they finally found a content creator that also doesn't like them. So just because of that, they started following me. I have never really talked to these people because I don't care about those people, but they still came without me even really doing anything. So if you're looking to get, for example, the attention of the competitive Overwatch, subreddit, you instead of making content that is like properly appropriate, you always need to keep in mind what they do not like and what they do like. So one thing that I do with my Reddit post, this is kind of a sad reality about Reddit, actually. Reddit doesn't really care about the content of a post. Reddit cares about how a post is presented. If you properly format a post with like a bold title, different bullet points, it's very nicely done, a little bit of a cursive right in there. It looks really good. At that point, you can talk shit and they're still going to give you attention, right? But if you have a really, really good post, but you're from fucking Egypt and your English isn't top notch, they're not really going to care. That's unfortunately just how like Reddit is, because content is thrown at you at such a fast pace that you need to develop that kind of skill to just quickly look at something and figure out, oh, okay, is this something that I'm interested in, or is this something that I'm not interested in, right? So that's why when you look at some of my most successful Reddit posts, they're very, very well structured, point by point, multiple paragraphs. I sent that shit through Grammarly like 3 times so it looks clean. I also had to like phrase certain things to maybe be a little bit more neutral. Getting information out to people that you want them to hear, you can't just give it to them directly. You always have to find a way to kind of go around it. And to some parts, that is annoying because the content creators that just do give content directly, that don't beat around the bush, right? Obviously, if you read the comments, right? If you or Volumel or something read it, like, I haven't seen you guys ever get negative comments.
Yes,
right?
100%.
Because there's nothing, or like there's usually not much to disagree with. Like people just like what you have to say.
Yeah.
But they don't want that. They might tell you that they want that, but the majority of Reddit doesn't want that. They want something opinionistic that they can either downvote or upvote. But if they just see an objective post, they're not going to lean either way. And the post doesn't really start gaining a whole lot of traction. One example was the hero ban conversation, right?
Yeah.
So I had this huge post about hero bans, and the reason that post got so much traction and so many upvotes is not just because I put a lot of effort into that post, but because it was so opinionated that people who would agree with that post would end up downvoting contradictory opinions.
Yeah.
Right? So even if someone else would make a post disagreeing with me, I had the momentum at that point. And obviously that sucks because I want people to just make up their own mind, have their own objective opinion. But in the end, people are going to bandwagon. If you remember, recently there was this drama with Jane's like tournament admins. Like there was this huge post on competitive Overwatch about the Elo Hell tournaments, and everyone was siding with. I don't know how many posts, like upvotes. It got thousands of upvotes, that post, right? And the only reason there was no proof, there were no pictures, no chat logs. It was just a wall of text. He didn't even send any confirmation to the moderators or anything, but still people upvoted it and they started shitting on that stuff so much until eventually Benchmob, or like it could have been any journalist, to be honest, they actually go in, they ask questions, they find out the truth, but at that point it's already too late. And I think that's really the dangerous part about Reddit, because either you are, like me with the hero ban post, or like that guy with the Elo Hell post, where you just go first and you abuse that momentum.
Yeah.
Or you risk the chance of someone else taking it and doing something with that momentum that might end up hurting you, right?
Yeah.
Reddit is very complex sometimes, but when you spend a lot of time around a certain subreddit, you start to understand how that subreddit kind of ticks. I kind of hate it because all of a sudden, when I post a comment on Reddit, right? So one example is recently there was this like the new character got announced, and they showed that in-game picture, and I have my little notification, so I'm always the first person to write a comment on all of the Reddit posts. And I knew, for example, that right now one of the big topics is like that Soldier recently, they said that he was homosexual, right? So I knew that just by kind of putting that into that comment, I could gain traction of that. Or how people would always misjudge new characters and either call them super OP or super trash. I could have just gone to the reveal post and said, oh, this character looks super cool, I can't wait to play him, like all the other people are doing, and all of a sudden you're somewhere down there and nobody really cares about the opinion. But for that post about about his picture, I didn't just say, oh, he looks like Lucio got mixed with Soldier. I specifically phrased it looks like Lucio, Soldier, and Junkrat had a child together somehow, right? So I said the exact same thing, but now we have that extra implication, kind of, because Soldier recently was, and people, they do pick up on that, and all of a sudden it sparks through. Or with the post, I said that, I can't wait for people to call this character either super overpowered or super underpowered. I wasn't really taking a side. I wasn't calling the character underpowered or overpowered, but I was pointing out, and I was making people self-aware. And you should know this as kind of a psychologist. If there's a group of people, so if there's a group, everyone thinks that they have like kind of their own unique opinion. And in this case, I was essentially calling out the entire subreddit. Because the subreddit does always have huge knee-jerk reactions. But nobody admits that they are a part of that problem, right? Everyone thinks, oh yeah, the entirety of Reddit always has these knee-jerk reactions and they overreact to these characters, but not me, right? And I'm pretty sure that comment is like the top 1 or 2, I say 800 or 900 upvotes, even though that I'm pretty sure that every single person that did upvote that is going to see the abilities of the character and think to themselves, this is OP, or this is super, super trash, right? So yeah, there is a lot of thought that goes into social media that I wish I wouldn't really have to like bother with, and I'm never going to like hurt anyone with it. Like I'm never gonna lie or say something disingenuous or anything like that. I say the same stuff that I would say normally. I just rephrase it a little bit because I know that way more people are going to get to see it. And that's just kind of something that I learned from YouTube.
No, and I think that's a really good thing for anyone. Because, I mean, lots of people want to do content creation, me included, a bunch of other people who I talk to. And for me, it was always like, consistency is probably the biggest thing that I'm worried about, is like, how often do I upload and make sure I keep doing this? And I think I've proven that. I think right now with the Overwatch, I think I'm one of the most consistent, if not the most consistent lately. So for me, that was like a big thing, but kind of looking at like the different social psychology of like Reddit in a whole is kind of a very interesting topic itself. Because I do agree that a lot of times who posts first and what they post can go very back and forth. And mentioning Slashers, he's had lots of examples of this. Like him and Fissure were a big one on Reddit, where quite literally each week it was a different side. It was exactly, like yo-yoing back and forth, and you were like, wow, it's like literally whoever decides to say something, everyone just like shifts, and you're like, what the hell is going on? So that's a very interesting. So we go from content into getting into your like coaching. We've talked about some of your philosophies, which I find very fascinating, because you take a huge approach with psychology. A lot of your videos, psychology seems to be something that is very important to you, which makes me very happy as someone who works in mental health. So I appreciate that. I don't always agree with what you say. There's some things that I think is a little bit off. That is
exactly what it's supposed to do. But yeah, to be fair, I never studied it as well. So if you're probably right. If I say A, you say B, people should probably listen to you, to be fair.
Well, it's like you're gonna social psychology your way through that better than I am. But you weren't off. Like, I watched some of your videos, like one of them being on like Tilt and stuff like that, and they weren't actually far off. There was like minor things that should shift, and so you must care about psychology to some degree. Have you read up on any of this stuff? Is it just from talking to people? Is it from experience? Where do you get this either natural osmosis level of learning psychology, which is a lot of psychology is common sense. To be fair, a lot of it is common sense, but to some degree, where did you start to pick up on this and realize that it's important? Because you mentioned earlier that some coaches don't really care about the way they treat players and stuff like that, but this seems to be something that you actually care about.
So I need to be honest. It's actually interesting. I'm like a 180 of who I used to be. When I was younger, I couldn't care less about psychology, really, because I thought, so for one, because of like the whole family environment, and it not being a big topic, but also because I thought that psychology is just like, there's no, like, it's like it's not science. That's kind of what I told myself. Like, you know, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, we don't even know how the brain works. What are you trying to analyze, right? And I thought that those were just like hippies. And you know, they put you on a couch and they tell you to talk about your childhood and all of that stuff. And I didn't really realize how important that was. But there was a phase, like during that transition from university to what I do now. And I don't want to talk about that. I think I've talked to it about like 1 or 2 people max. But it's not really something that I like probably am ever going to plan to probably talk about. But it made me, it completely changed my perspective on psychology and mental health, because that was a moment where I realized that like this is real, and that like a human brain is, you can do a lot to affect the human brain just by talking to someone. You can change how they think. And that's what gave me that motivation. So I never read up on any of that sort of stuff. Everything that I say is I just came up with it. Which again is why some things might not be like exactly how they're supposed to be. And I don't really know how I came up with them. When I was doing the private coaching, I was talking to a lot of different people. And because I didn't have a lot of like social interactions in school, I didn't actually get to know a lot of people. So the people that I knew, I thought they were all incredibly unique. But when I started doing the private coaching and all of a sudden I was meeting like over 20 new people a week, that's when I realized, no offense, but people are not unique.
No, they're not.
Okay? You can, all of them, you can put them into a category and you can predict what they're going to do just based on like what you've seen. And I started to see those patterns, and I looked at certain psychological traits that they had that I thought were beneficial, and I inquired about, you know, how their life essentially is, like what do they do outside of video games, how do they treat this, what is their general mindset. And I started to see that certain advantageous psychological traits come with certain behavioral patterns. And as I coached more and more people, those beliefs just kind of started to manifest themselves. So all of a sudden I had this huge network where if someone does A, he is more likely to exhibit trait B. And then I started experimenting with different ways to get people to do A, and to see if that maybe makes them more likely to show that trait B that they already have, but it's not very kind of expressed, to make that a little bit, you know, more prominent. And that's how I came, you know, how I found out about the whole, like the mirror psychology thing, where you do something in hopes that they're going to do it. I also experimented with like some like shadier things to get people to do stuff. For example, giving them like, sometimes you have to, that's something I learned. Sometimes you just have to lie to people to get them open to certain ideas. So one example was that some people think that if they don't have a 144 hertz monitor, they're never going to get anywhere as a hit scan DPS.
Oh, I know you're
just
going.
As an example.
There's a psychological principle that you're going into that I can already tell. It's going to be good.
And the thing is that a 144 hertz monitor is helpful, but I realized that there is no way that I can get this player to not blame his gear unless I completely strip the relevancy of that gear. So I don't tell them, oh, you know, like a 144 hertz monitor is helpful, but it's not why you're aiming bad. I tell them that it doesn't matter. I tell them outright, it makes no difference, which is a blatant lie. It is not true. Yeah. If you want to perform at a high level, you're going to need some. But I'm not going to tell them it. I'm going to tell them this is a waste of money. Okay. I tell them I made it to GM on like 40 FPS or some shit. None of that is true. But what it does is it opens them up to the idea that maybe there is something else that is holding them back. So I start, now that I have kind of opened up that avenue, I express these things to him, and I start working on these things with them, and he starts seeing progress. And as soon as I get the impression that he notices said progress, that's when I can kind of ease up on the radical ideas that I conveyed earlier and said, well, you know, if you want to get a 144 hertz monitor, you can do it. It's going to be a little bit helpful, right? Because at that point, I know that the player is in a position where he realizes that the importance of that monitor, while it exists, is not as ubiquitous as he initially anticipated. So when I say things, I very rarely tell them things that, like, the truth. I tell them what they need to hear. When they have a bad habit, for example, let's say that a platinum tracer, he always recalls in some weird situation, right? So he's doing something that I don't think he should do. But in some situations, you should still do that, right? In 10% of cases, you should do that thing that he does. Just in 90%, he shouldn't. But the problem is conveying that to him is very difficult, right? So instead of doing that, instead of telling him, oh, you should only do this 10% of the time, I tell him, don't do it at all anymore. So now he sees that he has a much higher success rate, because all of a sudden he doesn't find success in 10% of situations, he finds it in 90% of situations. And now that he has seen both extremes, that's when I can slowly introduce those exceptions that allow him to get those remaining 10% of things right. So you kind of have to zero in. You don't immediately tell them what they're supposed to do. You kind of need to help them figure all of that stuff out by themselves, because if you just tell them what to do, they're not really going to fully understand it.
Yeah. I would encourage in the future, find people who've actually played on low FPS and use them as example rather than lying.
Oh, I do. There's a command on my Discord. It is question mark. Let me do this. It is question mark EQO. I'm gonna type that on my Discord real quick. And it links to this picture. You don't have to show it on your show, but just so you know what I'm talking about. And it was of an article with on the Overwatch League website about EQO, and he said that I just played with what I had and I didn't mind, because even if you have the worst possible situation, you can always perform. And it says how he had 180 ping and 30 FPS, but he still had an account in first place on the ladder. Right. So I used that as an example, like, hey, this is a pro player. He was on the second best Overwatch League team in season 1. He played with 30 FPS. Okay. So if he can do that, okay, fuck yeah, you can do that as well. Okay. It's clearly possible.
But I understand, like, you're trying to rationalize these ideas that people have because they're irrational thoughts, and you're trying to rationalize them, which is completely understandable and is used very much all the time in certain behavioral therapies, like rational emotive behavioral therapy is a really good example that utilizes that technique. So one of the things that I noticed when I was kind of looking into you is you had when you were playing against Fusion University and afterwards when you were in XL2 and you guys lost to them, you kind of talked about Arrow as being a very good coach, and kind of like now it seems almost that you're looking at coaches in a very much different light than maybe even you did then. Yes. How do you judge coaches from the outside? Because to my knowledge, it is very much almost impossible, right? It's from the outside, it seems almost impossible to judge whether or not a coach is good or not, unless everyone comes out and says they're bad. And even then, they could scapegoat. Realistically, it could just be a scapegoat.
Of course.
So how do you judge whether or not a coach is good or not?
The only way that you can really do that is by collecting information, either through players that have worked with that coach or assistant coaches that he's worked with, right? So one example is Jane, not Arrow. Arrow currently works with Jane, Jane, and he used to work with Kraken Laken, who was the off-tank for our team. He recently decided to leave to pursue other opportunities. So Jane and Kraken are like kind of two gates that I have towards Arrow, right? And I talked a lot to Kraken, and again, obviously, I know that there's always going to be a little bit of bias when talking to sources like this. So I tried to maneuver my way around that, and I managed to get like a lot of information about how Arrow teaches or like coaches, what his philosophies essentially are through these ways. And again, you're never going to completely figure out how a coach works until you actually work with them. But I would say that I have a pretty accurate understanding of what Arrow's coaching style overall is, what are his strengths, what are his weaknesses, all that sort of stuff. And also just by working with other coaches before, I've seen a lot of coaches work. You also kind of start to understand what styles of coaching are like pretty mainstream, because the thing is, so if Coach B used to work with Coach A as an assistant coach, chances are that Coach B is going to exhibit a lot of the behavior that he learned from Coach A. So by looking at how Coach B coaches, you can get a general idea of which of those techniques that he uses or which approaches he uses, he might have copied from Coach A. So that way you can kind of cross-reference information from multiple sources, and you can start to figure out how a coach actually works. Now, this is never going to be 100% accurate. Yeah. In the end, the only way to really figure out how a coach coaches is by working with them or being a player for them, that sort of stuff. But it does allow you to give a general idea. Obviously, also things like social media, although social media is not as helpful because a lot of coaches tend to put on a like kind of a mask for social media. So that's kind of how I get an idea. And nowadays, I am in a position where I do generally prefer to underestimate a coach rather than overestimate him, because in the end, if you underestimate them, you're going to be more likely to do things that throw them off guard. Because a lot of coaches in order to be successful as a coach, you need to be very confident in what you do, and you need to be convinced that what you're doing is right. So if they don't expect to be underestimated usually, so you can kind of throw them off a little bit that way. And it is a lot of mind games. Now, that level of mind games usually only comes into place for very specific matches. So for a regular season match in contenders, you don't really think too much about it, because you're much more focused on making your team the best it can be, rather than making specific preparations for the enemy team. But with the XL2 against Fusion match, we had 4 weeks to prepare for that game. So that's when you can really, really start looking into the strengths and weaknesses of that particular team, and you can try to understand them. But the problem was, back then, I was not in the position that I am now. So what I did is I didn't underestimate them, I overestimated them. And what ends up happening when you overestimate a team is that you become so focused on countering what that team does that you stop putting as much attention into what your team does, right? So the approach that I ended up going with was, okay, they're a really good team. We're going to look at their strongest players and we're going to figure out how to disable them. In retrospect, the approach that I instead would have taken is, yes, they're good, but who cares? We have Nene, we have Flower, we have Mangachu. I'm going to make those better than what they have. I'm going to force them to react to us, right? Which is, obviously I just didn't have that knowledge back then. But that is what I do now, because that knowledge is also a lot more permanent. So if obviously I couldn't really do that last season because we'd never got that far, unfortunately. But helping your own players succeed and building off of their strengths is permanent, because that is something that they take onto their entire career and that they're going to remember. But me, working with XL2, trying to prepare them how to counter Fusion University, that is all empty knowledge that is not going to be relevant anymore, because that meta doesn't exist anymore. That this matchup isn't going to happen again, right? Maybe
it's like studying for a high school test.
You're studying for a high school test. You're going to get 1 grade, but afterwards, what the frick are you supposed to do with this? But I much rather focus on stuff that is going to accompany them. And I know now that all of the players that I've worked with on Uprising Academy, they're going to benefit from the stuff that I managed to tell them, even well after their ventures with the Boston Uprising are over.
Mm-hmm. So looking at XL2 briefly, one of the unique things about XL2 is you were put in like a co-coach role instead of there being a head coach. From the outside and from my knowledge, this doesn't sound very effective, like at all. Because especially if you had 2 opposing ideas, like I could see it working if maybe you had different fields, or there was one that was completely different. So one was based on like mentality.
Philadelphia Fusion has a similar thing. So Philadelphia Fusion, they also have 2 head coaches, but one of them is for the Western players. Or like one is like a Western head coach, the other one is like a Korean head coach, right? So they have that all figured out, and they found a lot of success. On XL2, it's a very weird situation because. So first of all, the way that I got the tryout was I did my private coaching, and one day like a 4.2K player, he got a coaching session. And at the end of and he asked me like, hey, can I record this coaching session? And I said, yeah, sure, because a lot of people want to rewatch that. Yeah. And then at the end of the session, he was like, hey, can I send this to a friend maybe? I think she might be interested. And that friend was Kita, who was my co-coach on XL2. So she saw it, she was impressed with it, she decided to put me into a trial, because they were trialing coaches at the time, around 51 coaches, I think. And they were they already had some favorites. And one of those favorites actually was Tickety, who currently coaches with Dallas Fuel. But Tickety decided to decline the offer with XL2 because Aero put him into Dallas Fuel. And obviously, he'd rather be there, right? So they were starting to look into secondary options out of the remaining 50 tryouts. But they gave me the tryout. I started working with the team. And after I was done with them, they weren't really looking at the other 50 tryouts anymore. Like, they knew that I was their guy, which obviously was very good, because whenever I get a tryout, my confidence peaks a lot, because I'm like, oh, I got this tryout. Like I mentioned earlier, that I always need like a reward or someone else's confirmation in order to gain confidence. It was the same thing there, right? After I got invited to that tryout, I had that confidence, and that helped me throughout the tryout. But that confidence, it doesn't last forever, right?
Yeah.
Back then, I didn't have this kind of internal confidence and like internal belief in my own ability that I have now. So what ended up happening is that once I started working with the team, while we were co-coaches, I can't go too much into the specific situation, but I was hesitant about taking a very dominant role within that team, right? And the more or the less dominant that I became, the more dominant the other half of the co-coaching staff became. So what ended up happening is I was essentially the assistant coach and she was the head coach, despite the tryouts being for the head coach position. Kita was the team was told that Kita would take on more of a managerial role, while we got a head coach. But management ended up deciding against that because they felt that they didn't want to give a newcomer this much control over the team as to put them into a head coach position. So they put me into a co-coach position so that they could ensure that Kita would still have some control over the main team and could still veto any of the decisions that I made that they thought would be unconstructive. So not getting the head coach position also kind of, it kind of made me wonder, okay, why didn't I get this? Was that
something? Did that hit your confidence? Because you sound like you're very.
It did, definitely, because I was very confident about the head coach tryout, but then I kind of realized, okay, so clearly that wasn't going to happen. And I still got the spot, and I was very grateful about the opportunity. And I gained a lot of experience, especially being able to work with Korean players for the first time. That's something that I still benefit from today, just knowing how they think. But I did start to become more and more silent, and it became very, very unconstructive, right? So in the end, I decided that it's not really going to be super, super great anyways. And that's when I started to readjust my approach to working with teams and my reapproach to coaching in general, because that was the first time where I really realized that and had I not overestimated someone's capabilities, I would have been able to find much more success, right? So that's kind of the approach that I take on now, which has been working pretty well.
I think it's a good way to start looking at it. So when you left XL2, was it mutual? Was it you just wanted to go someplace else? Did they not want you anymore?
Yeah, so at that point, Kita decided that she would go back to the military. She told me that she just kind of liked the structure of the military, and I can understand it, because when you're in the military for a while and you get out of it, it's pretty hard to adjust. So she just wanted back into that clear structure. And so what ended up happening is that I wasn't really sure about the team anymore. The only way that I would have continued coaching that team was if I was for sure head coach. So I was actually interested in continuing to essentially, coach them under the assumption that I would become head coach. In the end, I talked with the NYXL management, and they decided that because of the, I guess, lack of success that I had in the previous season, because of the whole co-coaching situation, I didn't really, do what I know that I could have done. Yeah. So they decided, okay, we're just going to look into someone else, and they decided to let me go. So, that's just kind of how it wasn't bad blood or anything. In the end, I said, okay, it's fine, and they looked for someone new. Now, in retrospect, how it works too. Yeah, exactly. So. In retrospect, I don't really I don't think that it was a huge setback or anything. Obviously, getting removed from a team isn't always great, but at that point, I realized that, okay, I was very, that is obviously very shattering, because, having management tell you, hey, you're not with the team anymore, all of a sudden, that hits your confidence really, 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 really hard, because you had your chance to prove yourself and you messed it up, which I did. But instead of doing that, I realized, okay, I know why I got kicked. I'm gonna stop caring now. I don't really give a shit. I'm just gonna do stuff. And like I started to adopt that mindset that I saw in my bigger brother, you know, where I realized, okay, you know, at this point I'm so deep, I might as well just take these risks, right? And that's, you know, what I ended up doing afterwards. And, you know, obviously then XL2 got their new coach, and now they're doing, you know, like the whole roster reshuffling. And I'm still on very good terms with their manager right now. So like Adam, he decided to go from support to manager. I still talk to him regularly. Everything is cool there. It's just, you know, it just didn't work out. And I, you know, obviously my voice is dying, dude. We've been going for like 2 hours. So
this is a good episode. So.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So, but yeah, so, you know, I decided to leave. They're doing their thing. I'm doing my thing. It's all completely fine. I learned from it, which is, I think, the only thing that really matters in the end.
Okay. So looking at, you move from there, you go to Boston Uprising, and I don't know how you judge success, but generally the outside results are the way that they judge success. And your results were not that great last season. Is that a failure on your part?
No. So previously I would have said yes. Previously I would have said, oh shit, 5 to 8 is bad. Okay. Because previously I would put a lot more value into what the public thinks or what the public considers success. But that is no longer the case. Right.
And that's true for your management too, right? So basically the idea, if
I'm
understanding this correctly,
of course. Yeah.
Is that you guys don't really care about your placing. It's more about how many players do you develop that either get bought or given to Boston Uprising. Yeah.
But quite frankly, even if they were interested in standings, I still wouldn't really care, because at this point, the only thing that I care about is what I deem success. As long as I consider the season is a success, I don't really care about what other people think anymore. So in the end, what, you know, I worked with the players. We had, you know, obviously it was tough in the end, right? And there are always things that you could have done differently. But one of the reasons that we didn't do as well is if you look at the entire ecosystem, right? So at that place, because Overwatch League hadn't started yet, a lot of the teams had two-way players within their teams, right? So the competition was a lot steeper. We had Fusions, Gator was in Atlanta, Elk was on Fusion, like all of this. So the rosters were very, very strong at that point, because when Overwatch League isn't running, teams aren't really picking up like players, right? There's the expansion teams are picking up new roster, but there weren't that many like pickups besides that. So it meant that like a lot of good talent just kind of like started turning into a traffic jam, and there was a lot of good talent in contenders. And more importantly, if you look at all of these teams, if you look at Atlanta, who previously were with LNL, right? If you look at Second Wind, who have been together for so long. If you look at Fusion University, who have been together for 3 seasons. If you look at Team Envy, who have been together with multiple seasons. If you look for with XL2, who have been together for multiple seasons, right? Yeah. Being together for multiple seasons is very, very important because it builds a synergy. And GOATS is not a team comp about individually popping off. It's a team comp about synergy and about teamwork and about succeeding as a team. We were a roster that was built, was put together for that season. These players haven't really played together. We got Fusions as a replacement for Decod pretty much as the season started. We got Klaus as the season started. We got Punk as soon as the season started. Asking hasn't played in a contender season. The entire roster was completely new. So at that point, I knew that there is no way that we could build a level of synergy that would be able to compete with any of the other teams. And I accepted that, and that was completely fine with me. What I focused on is giving, just focusing on long-term progress that these players could use going into the next season, right? It's a marathon, it's not a race. So even getting 5th through 8th, if I would have gotten anything better that season, I would have been very, very surprised. And it wouldn't have been because of my success, it would have been because of the other team's failures. If we would have beaten XL2, it's not because we are better, it's because they would have messed up. Right. This season is different because now a lot of these teams are changing. I can't talk about all of the rosters, but most of the strong rosters last season are going to be a lot weaker this season. And now we have an extra season of synergy. Sure, we have a new main tank, but you know, I'm doing everything I can to incorporate him. But besides that, assuming that the roster stays like this, I don't know. Right? Maybe someone gets picked up. Assuming that this roster stays like this. Or even better, if we would have kept Fusions, if we would have kept the exact same roster, then I would say that we are at least a top 3 contender, if not even capable of winning the entire season, just because of all of the synergy that we built and all of the progress that we were able to make. taking into account the meta. And if you look at other teams that were relegated, like Gladiators Legion or Mayhem Academy or all of those teams, right? We weren't relegated, even though we were in a very, very similar position as these teams in terms of how the roster was made up and how fresh everything was. So given the circumstances, I think that I was definitely successful last season. I've made a lot of progress with all of the players, which I'm obviously very proud of. And I think that going into this season, all of that progress is hopefully going to show. And I definitely am looking for, better than 5th to 8th for sure.
Okay, awesome. So I have one last question for you. And I even gave it to you a little bit beforehand to kind of ease it up on you. So having been on here, you've been on here quite a long time so far, which normally goes by very quickly. It's kind of amazing how quickly this goes by on my end. So having been on the show, if you could see anyone else come on the show, and they can be casters, they can be behind the scenes, they can be coaches, they can be players, as long as they're involved in esports, that is the only criteria. They can be for different games, they can be for Overwatch. Who would you have come on the show?
I mean, it probably would have to be Made. He was the head coach for second win in the last season, and he turned a team that didn't really accomplish that much. He took all of that pre-built synergy and he made it into a team that was competing with Fusion University Atlanta. So he even beat the previous success story that was LNL, right? LNL made it to the quarters. Second win made it all the way to the semis. So I think that kind of picking his brain on what allowed him to find this much success within unsigned roster is very interesting. Obviously, he is retired now, if you would ask him. But I still think that there's like a lot of valuable insight that you can find from him on how he worked with an unsigned team. Obviously, he's also from Australia, so he can maybe talk a little bit more about that scene. And I think it would be interesting to kind of ask him some questions.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. And I really, you gave us a lot of insight on a bunch of things. So I just really want to thank you for doing that. I hope everyone at home enjoyed the show. I think this is a fun one. It's been deep dives into the minds of esports. And until next time, guys, have a nice day.